Most pro wrestling matches are assembled using the three-act structure. It is one of, if not the oldest, narrative skeleton in the history of the world. And not only are most pro wrestling matches assembled using this formula, so too are most movies. You might recall last year, I made a video dissecting the exact story elements of Paddington 2. Quite possibly the most charming movie ever put on screen. And in keeping with this idea of drawing analogies between what we see on screen and what we make in the ring, I thought that we would once again plumb some lovable, heartwarming, and clever fare to see what it can teach us about the construction of wrestling performances. That's why today we're talking about Pacific Rim. Quackenbush. This is Till We Make It, and if you are passionate about the craft of professional wrestling, if you are never done learning, make sure to subscribe to my channel now. You can even ring that little notification bell. I understand it will notify you when I publish new videos. Today, we're going to break down and analyze Pacific Rim, the 2013 blockbuster directed by Guillermo del Toro. It is a straightforward action flick skinned with sci-fi elements, and it is done across 3 acts. The total runtime of this movie is 131 minutes, but those last 9 minutes are just the end credits, and they don't really make up any part of the narrative. So the whole of Pacific Rim, as far as we're concerned, is 122 minutes. It's just a hair over 2 hours long. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what they do in Act 1 and Act 2 of this film. In case it's not obvious, spoilers ahead. The first 35 minutes of Pacific Rim comprise Act 1. That's where all the world building needs to be done. That's where all the setup needs to be done. That's where we must come to know and understand the characters. And in a professional wrestling match, Act 1, which we sometimes call the shine, the open, or the promise, is also where all the setup work must be done. Everything the audience needs to understand about the match and the characters has to be told to them in Act 1 so they can enjoy the rest of the performance. For example, if you happen to be presenting a stipulation match, like a lumberjack match, it would be important in Act 1 to show the audience exactly how that stipulation will color the rest of the performance. Here's what I mean. The very first time that a wrestler is tossed out to the floor, do the lumberjacks just grab that wrestler and immediately return them to the ring? Or when a wrestler tumbles out to the floor, do the lumberjacks out there pummel the wrestler first for good measure and then return them back to the ring? Are the lumberjacks out on the floor impartial to the face and the heel? Or do they display certain proclivities based on their individual character alignments? If any of that is going to impact the rest of the match, and I bet it will, it all needs to be established and understood by the audience during Act 1. One possible perspective on Pacific Rim is that it is a stipulation match of sorts. So, important that you understand, here's the broad premise of the film. Every once and again, a giant alien monster crawls out of this interdimensional breach that's at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean so it can stomp on cities and terrorize people. But to defend humankind, we have built giant Jaeger robots. And if you watch Pacific Rim hoping to see giant robots fighting giant alien monsters, you will not be disappointed. But therein is a stipulation. The stipulation that the movie puts forth is this. The Jaeger robots can only be controlled by a dual pilot system. 2 human beings must control the Jaeger, and those human beings must be drift compatible. That is to say, they must share some kind of deep bond. they must be able to endure what the movie calls a neural handshake. So when these two pilots are in perfect mental alignment, then they can control the Jaeger robots and presumably fend off the monsters, the kaiju that emerge from the breach at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. But if the pilots are not in perfect mental alignment, if the neural handshake is not strong enough, or as the vernacular of the movie puts it, if they are drift incompatible, well, then things go badly. All of this is clearly shown to the audience during Act 1. We meet two brothers who are drift compatible. We meet a husband and wife team that are drift compatible. We meet a father and son duo. We even meet a set of triplets. And these teams each pilot one of the 4 remaining Jaeger robots on Earth, which are kept stored inside a protective shatter dome. We understand this stipulation of the Pacific Rim movie because it is shown to us. It isn't explained through dialogue. It isn't revealed by a voiceover. It is shown to us during Act 1. And in the case of our stipulation match, that lumberjack match that we were talking about a moment ago, let's explain the difference between showing and telling the audience what the world of a lumberjack match is all about. Now, of course, the ring announcer can explain to the audience exactly how the lumberjack match works. But that's telling them. It isn't showing them. It is far more impactful if they see the stipulation of the lumberjack match being enacted, and no amount of reading off index cards or even commentators supplying that narration for home viewers takes the place of the audience actually seeing the stipulation enacted when a wrestler tumbles out to the floor and must have that interaction with the lumberjacks waiting on the outside. If the lumberjacks outside of the ring are going to behave one way when a babyface comes tumbling out, and they're going to behave a different way when a heel comes tumbling out, it is important that that is shown to the audience during Act 1, so that all that setup work is done early on. They are prepared to enjoy the rest of the performance, and they've seen how things can go right, how things can go wrong, and any other relevant variations therein. Similarly, the same kind of work is done in Act 1 of Pacific Rim. We see what happens when the dual pilot system goes right, and also what can happen if it goes wrong. When it goes wrong, the Beckett brothers pay a terrible price. And yet, when it goes right, the Hanson father and son duo are praised for their heroism. The lion's share of the world building is completed in Pacific Rim in the opening 3 minutes of the film. There isn't a wasted scene. I would make the argument there isn't a single wasted line of dialogue. The setup is done as economically as possible so that you are ready to enjoy the entire rest of the story. And this story takes a full 122 minutes to be told. They tell one story as efficiently as they possibly can, and then it's over. I want to place Act 1 aside, and let's look at Act 2. In a wrestling match, this is our heat. And over an hour of Pacific Rim's runtime is dedicated to Act 2. They spend 65 minutes heating up the action in Pacific Rim, and I want to call attention to the economical way in which they get the very most out of their heat, and also what we can learn about it as professional wrestlers. By my count, Pacific Rim makes exactly 12 moves in its heat. Each of these introduces or explores an obstacle, or otherwise raises the stakes. That is to say, it makes it harder for the heroes to win the day. We can think of each of these as a complicating factor in the plot. And I think there are exactly 12, and I'm going to list them for you right now. Number 1, Raleigh Beckett and his new partner, Mako Mori, are drift incompatible. Number 2, Dr. Geisler must leave the protective environment of the Shatter Dome in order to acquire a kaiju brain sample to further his research. Furthermore, he'll have to navigate the black market in Hong Kong to do so. Number 3, Mako is unable to rein in her emotions about kaiju attacks, making her too volatile to attempt another neural handshake, and thus she is grounded by her commanding officer, the Marshal. Number 4, the good guys start infighting. The Hansons are suddenly at each other's throats, and the Marshal and Raleigh Beckett begin to quarrel over the decision to ground Mako from the mission. Number 5, for the first time ever, 2 kaiju come through the breach at the exact same time. And number 6, to make things even worse, they are the biggest kaiju on record. They are both Category 4. Number 7, of the 4 remaining Jaeger robots, the newest in the fleet, Crimson Typhoon, gets destroyed. Number 8, another of the Jaeger robots, Cherno Alpha, is also destroyed. Number 9, an electromagnetic pulse renders the fastest remaining Jaeger in the fleet, Eureka Striker, totally immobile. Number 10, the 2 Category 4 kaiju attack the exact city where Dr. Geisler is attempting to acquire the kaiju brain sample, Hong Kong. Number 11, Herc Hansen has his arm broken, so even if his Jaeger, Striker Eureka, is restored to full functionality, he won't be able to co-pilot it with his son. Last but not least, number 12, the Marshal's health is declining rapidly due to the lack of radiation shielding in the early Jaeger robots, of which he was a star pilot. These 12 complicating factors, these 12 moves, all make it harder for the babyfaces to prevail in Act 3 once we leave Act 2. And Act 2, the heat of Pacific Rim, it runs a full 65 minutes. And here is what is remarkable about that heat. There isn't 1 second in Act 2 that tells any other story. Every scene serves to heighten the stakes, to make it harder for the babyfaces. There isn't 1 frame in that second act of Pacific Rim that fails to do it. Even when the Hope Spot arrives toward the end of Act 2, it's another stakes move. That is unbelievably economical storytelling, or to put it another way, there are no wasted moves. I do not intend to ruin the climax of Pacific Rim for you if you want to go and enjoy it after watching this video. So absolutely no discussion of exactly what Act 3 contains here. But what can we learn about the structure of a pro wrestling match just by analyzing the work of Act 2? I think that the heat of a wrestling match, which is assembled with no more forethought than, we'll just call it all in the ring, or let's see what happens, will never be as efficient in its storytelling as the heat of Pacific Rim. Act 2 of Pacific Rim, I happen to think, is made up of 26 scenes. You could make an argument that it's 27 scenes, but that's a different video. But each of them are strategic moves. Each of them introduces a hurdle that the heroes have to clear, a new obstacle they have to contend with, or is a stakes move. It raises the stakes, making it more difficult for them to triumph. Beckett and Mako being drift incompatible, that is a hurdle the heroes will have to clear in the third act. The breach birthing 2 Category 4 kaiju at the exact same time, that's a massive obstacle. And half of the fleet of Jaeger robots being wiped out in the same fight, that definitely raises the stakes. That makes it harder for the heroes to prevail in Act 3. And because all of this is done so efficiently, there are no other moves to distract us from the story being told. It creates a sense of forward momentum. I went and saw Pacific Rim in an IMAX theater when it came out. And if you're wondering what the effect of this very economical storytelling was on a theater full of excited moviegoers, well, I will tell you, when that big Hope Spot finally arrives toward the end of Act 2, the theater I was in went nuts. They were cheering, they were applauding, myself included, because by that point, all of us were dying for a Hope Spot. The whole place came unglued, and we haven't even started the comeback yet. We're not even into Act 3 yet. We haven't even seen the false finishes yet. How many wrestling matches have you seen where the Hope Spot is greeted with something which could at best be described a tepid reaction? Because the Hope Spot feels obligatory or unearned. It's as if it has been put there because someone knows that a hope spot is supposed to be in the middle of a heat. I've seen a lot of wrestling matches exactly like that. In fact, I have even been in a few. What we can take away from the heat of Pacific Rim is how strategically deploying very economical storytelling in that middle chunk can contribute to the creation of tremendous momentum as you head into Act 3. And even if we understand that in theory, you might now be wondering to yourself, well, Mike, how might I actually implement something like that practically into the next match I wrestle? So just as an example, let's say that you are in a match and the heat of the match is going to be on the babyface's back. That's the focus of your storytelling. The heat is on the back. So if you want to be very economical about that storytelling, every single move you make during Act 2 will worsen the condition of the babyface's back. And every time you succeed in making its condition even worse, that's a stakes move because you are making it harder for the babyface to prevail. Then throughout the heat, you've got to keep heightening the stakes. You've got to make those stakes moves. So if 1/3 of the way through the heat, you send your babyface into the corner and just the impact of colliding with the turnbuckles is so painful on their back that they crumble into a heap down on the canvas, that is a stakes move. Things are getting worse. Maybe 2/3 of the way through the heat, the babyface can't even perform basic defensive maneuvers without their back giving out. That too is a stakes move. Furthermore, what if the babyface's finishing move requires them to do some lifting with their back? What if their finisher is a power bomb? How on earth could a babyface who uses a power bomb as a finishing move execute that with a damaged back? That's a real obstacle that will have to be contended with in Act 3. In your heat, the more that can be done to elevate the hurdles, the obstacles, or to introduce new complicating factors that affect the story you are telling, the better. And you do need to be economical about it. Tell exactly one story. If the first 6 moves that you do in that heat all affect your babyface's back, don't make move number 7 on the left arm. That's not economical storytelling, and that's also not the story you are telling. And if an endless succession of offensive moves seems like it will become monotonous over the course of a long heat, find different complicating factors that you can explore that are related to the story you're already telling. And here's an example for you. If, like in the example of the babyface who is having their back worked on, the action should tumble outside of the ring and land on the floor, you might be able to take the babyface and ram them back first into the guardrail. Now, just beating the referee's count back into the ring after being smashed into the steel railings is an accomplishment in and of itself. That is an exploration of a complicating factor that is related to the backstory you've already been telling. Pacific Rim really is a fun movie, and it's a great pro wrestling match too. It is 3-act structure very precisely. And that's not to say a strict adherence to that formula means that the movie isn't full of surprises. It definitely is. But it's a great example of 3-act structure done well. And one of the many things I think we can learn from Pacific Rim is how a very efficiently deployed heat helps set up a 3rd act, which will burn hot, get great reactions, and sets you up for maximum success in the ring. I hope you gained some new knowledge from today's video. That is precisely why I continue to make Till We Make It. People who are never done learning, they're never done acquiring more knowledge, I happen to think they are awesome. And that's how I know you are awesome. So keep on being awesome. And I will keep on making the videos. Together, we will keep on faking it.